Good morning. It is just after 10:30 a.m. It is Sunday, and that means it is time for Sunday Club, a weekly Ruby on Rails live stream where each week we write some Ruby on Rails code together. That's what we do every week. And we are working on an application which is an event ticketing and registration application where we want to focus on group registrations because that's eventually where we're heading, where there'll be some interesting domain modeling problems to solve and some other fun stuff like that going on. Okay, so let's start with some follow-up. Most important follow-up. I actually have my thing here. Finally testing negative for COVID this week. Had, a couple weeks ago did a stream and had a very bad cough and what I thought might be a cold or something like that. So tested positive for what ended up being, I don't know, 12, 13 days, very frustrating. And so now out the other end of that, which is fun. So that's all good. And also I have actually gone back and in the large Git branch that we had made, got a bunch of things rebased, tidied up slightly and over into master. I still haven't exposed this code base on GitHub or anything, just because I don't really have time to administer it or anything like that in terms of anyone taking a look or doing anything like that. I think I will do at some point, but I just keep making these big work in progress branches and not getting a chance to refactor them. So to rebase them, sorry. So I did that. We now have 10 commits or so from the last couple of streams that haven't been rebased. So we'll go through those another time, but yeah, we're nearly up to date. So this is a good chance. Let's jump over into what we actually want to do this week. Let's get into what we want to do, which is something on the Notion board that's been there a while. Let's take a look, and it is just one big blob of text, which just says, add request spec helpers for signed in users. And there's actually more than one of these, I think. And what does this mean, and what does it look like, and what are we going to do? Right, so we've started, as part of this repo, I started transitioning from using controller tests to request specs and feature specs to system specs. So those are using really similar, it's all RSpec on the top, but there was just like a few quirks of what was powering them underneath. So request specs and feature system specs are the new kind of preferred way to do things from some version of RSpec or Rails. I'm sorry, I don't really have the details to hand. But as part of that, when we first started adding them, I didn't really do anything other than just like get them working. And so what we've got at the moment is a situation where each individual test is doing something like, hey, are you an admin? I'm going to sign in as you if so. Then if you, then I'm going to perform the test. We also have some tests that we might want to do the same thing over and over again, but we don't have what in our spec is generally like, I know of them as shared examples, which is where you don't need to keep writing the test in each individual file. You might be able to sort of like extract that out and have one test that you can just say, oh, this bit of code works like all these other bits of code, just run the same set of tests, and then I don't have to write out the test each time. So we haven't done any of those. So let's go and take a look at what I mean by that. Let's go and actually see some specific examples. Let me unplonk that on the other screen. Just move Notion over to the other screen. All right, I'm gonna just bump some font size up a little bit. So let's pick somewhere to start. I think probably let's sort of potentially start our highest level test, like maybe our system specs. So I think we've got the fewest of these, although I'm not sure how much of these repeat at the moment. So we've got viewing an event in order, so you don't need to be signed in as these. And we've only got 2 admin ones, whereas I guess you probably do need to be signed in as an admin for these. So, okay, let's take a look at what we're actually talking about here. So we've got 2 files. One is viewing orders for an event. One is managing an event. So let's open up both these files. All right, so... Oh, I mean, they're literally, if I click between them, they're literally the same thing. So here... this is all the same code. And I guess what we're doing here is saying the user is going to sign in, and rather than trying to kind of like handle that in a kind of like behind the scenes way of like setting a token or doing something, we're just going to literally have the user perform the actions in the kind of headless browser or wherever it's doing. They're going to go to the page, they're going to type in their details, and they're going to click the login button. And so as you can imagine, we've got two here. We've got one where you're managing an event and one where you're viewing your orders. You would need this block, this before bit of code in all of the tests that you had in admin. Now at the moment, we haven't got much admin functionality, we've only got two, but eventually in a normal application, this would just start getting more and more and more tests. But you would always need the user to sign in because they're always going to need to be signed as an admin. So what we want to do is have somewhere where that just sort of goes away. And the other thing we probably want to do is, I don't think we actually covered this, and this might be actually more for the request specs, is have the idea that this doesn't work for someone who isn't signed in. But that's probably for our request specs. But it's the same idea where we would want one test where someone is signed in. We might then want to have another bit of code that's used on all of our admin side tests, which is like, hey, if you're not an admin, check that you get redirected or get an error message or get an unauthorized response or something like that. So let's take a look. This is going to be a good trip down memory lane for me because I sort of use some code bases where these already exist. But I haven't written one of these other than like in-place shared examples for a little while. So let's see if there's anything. Is there anything off the shelf for this? Like in RSpec. So yeah, this is going to be really good research because I haven't done it. This might sort of be a differently solved problem now since the last time I looked at it. So I don't know what to how best to frame this. So RSpec, system test. That's the one I'm looking for. So system test, and it's not necessarily a shared example. I mean, it's just a shared example to which you're passing a block, I guess, because you just want to say you're going to want to specify some stuff. So sign in user. I'm just going to put that. Oh, here we go. RSpec login before each example in a system test. Okay, great. What's the date on this? 11 months ago. Okay, great. So this, hopefully someone might have replied with like, hey, what's the latest version of this you should do? Trial and error. Okay, amazing. Move this around. Okay, so we've got I've just trial and error and ended up with the code below. The drawback that you need to control at session yourself, so I don't know what that means, and it's better to separate into a spec helper class or an RSpec shared context. Selenium Chrome is Capybara driver for Chrome. You can change it if you want. That's interesting. I've never had, oh, this is interesting. I've never had to do, I don't think I've ever done Capybara session new. I've always sort of got that for free, I guess. I've always just like, just use visit and find on the assumption that the session is what it is. So that's interesting. But this is just a before block, which is what we've got at the moment. And just adding it to a shared context. Okay, I'm not sure that's the one for us. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. System tests. Random request specs. Logging the user in before Capybara feature specs, system specs. Okay, so looking for different approaches here. Let me bump the font size up on this one. What is this from? This is from 2019. Right. Okay. So this isn't insurance. So this one I've done before. So I'll kind of go over this one because this is the sort of thing I was looking at, which is like I was interested in different approaches to this. If you're building an app that has user login functionality, you'll at some point need to write some tests that log the user in before performing the test steps. One approach I've seen, make this font even bigger. One approach I've seen is to have Capybara actually navigate to the sign-in page, fill in the email and password fields, and hit submit. So that's what we're doing here. So in our initial couple of tests that we've written, that's exactly what's happening. They are going to the sign-in page, and then they are filling in the fields, and they're clicking login or submit or whatever. This works, but if you're using Devise, it's a little more complicated than necessary. There's a better way. The Devise docs have a pretty good solution. Just add this to spec Rails helper, which is including the Warden test helpers, and then any place you need to log in, you can do login as factorybot.createUser. I mean, that's just passing in a user. Now, this one is something I've used before, but this is something where I feel like there was like a pattern that I don't know why it was established, but everyone just sort of used it, which is that we used login as in controller tests, which would now be request specs, I guess. But in the system tests, the shared example or shared context or block or whatever it was that we were using would go and do the filling in. And I wonder if there's sort of an argument around, I'm genuinely wondering, I don't know if there is, like, is there an argument where having that simulated go to the sign-in page and click the buttons, and fill in the fields and click the buttons and then have the user come back kind of forces that end-to-end process, so that like if there was a bug introduced where when you clicked sign in from a certain place, there was like a redirect that got broken or something. I'm just trying to make up some contrived example, but like, is there any value in that potentially? Like rather than doing login as, I don't know, by the way, I'm genuinely just thinking out loud to myself. I'm not trying to, I do, so then it goes on to say login before each test or login once before all tests. Do you do the login step on each test, or do you log in once then try and run all of your system level tests? The answer that I log in individually for each test. Yeah, I think I would, no matter what you had done on the one above, I think I would probably do the same thing. The reason that some of my tests require to be logged in, some of the request user that the site is not logged in, and the other tests require that some specific type of user is logged in. I do often put my login as call in a before block at the top of a test file to reduce duplication, but that doesn't mean only once for that set of files. A common misconception is that a before block will give a performance benefit by only running the code in a before block once. This is not the case. Before is a shorthand before each, and any code inside it will get run before each individual block. I never use before all inside of individual tests because I want each test to be as isolated as possible. Yeah, there are other things you can pass to before as well. Interesting. I think there's like before suite and before something else as well. Yeah, okay, all of that makes total sense. So what is this actually saying? What could we do here? So what we could do is grab this. I'm not 100% sure this doesn't already exist, but let's go and explore our options. So in our helper, doesn't seem to exist. Okay, we could, any other helpers in here? Should have matches. Oh, here we go. We've got loads. So we could put this in here, and then in here, move this over. I'm just going to copy the code out of the things. We've got login as. I think we could then comment out this. This could be user. Then we could log in as user. And I think the other test was exactly the same. So, oh no, look, we've already got user. That's just creating the. I'm an idiot. That's just creating the organization membership. So we've already got user there. So we could do exactly the same thing here. Comment these out, and then put login as user. Okay, so let's both of those. Just gonna make the font really big. Make the window big, and then nope, that's not what I want to do. Bundle. And we want to do system. Great, so they still pass. So basically the same thing has happened. Whereas if we were to leave this line out, we think something should fail. I am doing the system test, aren't I? Yes, okay. So we think some of these tests should fail because we haven't signed the user in. Yep, great, so we've got a failure there. I don't know how many are in there, 1, okay. Yep, great. Okay, so that's excellent. That is, I'm going to put some of these links to these in the YouTube video description. So if anyone watches this on Twitch, I know a few people do, then you still have to if you want these links, you can just Google it. I mean, you saw what I'm doing. So this is, what's this code with G? I'm going to copy the name of the post. And then the title. So that's in the YouTube description. I'm doing that on the other screen. Great. Okay, so that's one option. I like it. Great. We're underway. We've got stuff because we've already saved ourselves a bunch of lines of code. So we've still got some setup here that we sort of would still need. We still need to do this each time, even just to get to that. Whereas what we really want to do is not even need to bother with that. Although it's handy now that we know that we can do this. Go back to this one. It's handy to have that because then we can mess with this if we want. But we've still got a lot of boilerplate here. Like if you look, all of this is basically the same thing. So let's see if we can get rid of that as well. There was other stuff here. So this is from 6 years ago. Okay, so this one might not be. This is pretty much the same thing. So login as, and stuff. But this one is giving us a method. Okay, so module devise request spec helpers, include warden test helpers. Okay, yeah. So this one is defining a method that we can use. So this is sort of. It's actually not building anything there because we're passing in our resources scope. So okay, we're presumably passing in our user. So we could, let's see what else Google has got for us. See if it's okay. This is actually something I find where there's like a little bit of a difficulty in either finding stuff or I guess writing stuff, is because everyone's needs past that point of initially writing like tutorials and stuff start getting really specific. The Alberta Water Portal Society. I'm gonna look at what that is just to find out what that is. Oh, that's junk. Oh, is that just spam and someone has picked up? Oh, that's annoying. Is that just a spam result then? Oh no. Oh, that's sad because I love Alberta Water. I like just the words of that. Okay, cool. So RSpec controller test with device. This is. I think this is more just of the basic getting set up stuff. Yeah, that's just like getting underway. So that's not what we're looking for. Okay. Better Specs is always a good resource, or it has been in the past. Let's see what they've got going on. Shared examples. So I can't remember shared context RSpec. I think this might be where we can start to leverage. Use shared context to define a block that will be evaluated in the context of example groups, either locally using include context in an example group or globally using config include context. When implicitly including shared context via matching metadata, the normal way is to define matching metadata on an example group. I didn't even get that sentence. When implicitly including shared context via matching metadata, the normal way is to define matching metadata on an example group, in which case the context is included in the entire group. However, you also have the option to include it in an individual example instead. RSpec treats every example as having a singleton example group, analogous to Ruby's singleton classes containing just the one example. Right. That sort of got over my head a little bit there. So RSpec config, RSpec shared context, shared stuff do, blah, 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 it, blah, blah, blah. Shared stuff include. I thought this sort of all came a little bit for free. I'm actually going to not read the official docs now because I'm finding that a little bit difficult to follow. My memory of that is that shared context aspect. Here we go. Let's find some blog posts from peeps. So the end result we're trying to get to, remember, is having less code to write an individual feature or system test. In RSpec's shared contexts act like Ruby modules, allowing you to reuse a context between example groups that don't form a parent-child relationship. Like shared examples, shared contexts are extremely useful for cutting down clutter and duplication in specs. For example, consider a Rails controller that has several different actions, say show and update, but always need a user to be logged in and may respond differently based on that user's permissions. In general, those actions do not behave similarly, so shared examples are inappropriate, but it would be a pain to recreate each different type of user for each different action. This is the perfect case for shared contexts. So shared context login as a user, shared context logged in as an account admin, and then describe, get show, include context, logged in as a user. Sharing context by metadata. Right, I'm hoping this is about to explain what we just saw on, on the official docs. As shown in the above example, shared context are defined using shared context and added to an example group's context with include context. However, shared context can also be added to a context using metadata. When defining the shared context, pass a symbol as the second argument. So here, this one has experiment in the shared context. I'm going to keep zooming in to hopefully make this easier to read. So this is basically saying, hey, I'm going to introduce a bunch of one experiment here because the actual spec, the it block here, then can pass in. Oh wait, that's experiment and that's experimental. Is it different? I think they need to be the same. A typo? Or am I missing something there? I think, is there any comments on this? Is that a typo? Yeah, on this one, the shared context and the symbol on the it block are the same. I think that's a typo. So this one is shared context has this symbol passed in as an experiment, and then on the it block it has experiment, and I think it's supposed to be experimental. And so this experiment will run this shared context, and this one won't. That's my understanding. To be more precise, RSpec actually expects and stores metadata as a hash, so you can pass a hash and store multiple key value pairs in the metadata for both shared context definitions and examples and example groups. As a convenience, RSpec interprets symbols on their own as keys with the default value of true. However, you define the metadata, RSpec will automatically include a shared context if any of the key value pairs in an example's metadata matches any of the key value pairs in a shared context metadata. So what's that saying? So this is parsing experiment. I'll use the one down here because that one's got a fucking typo in it. So if we take this one here, this shared example and this it block have pending underscore confirmation. But that could be like you could pass in let's say you had two things you cared about. So one was pending confirmation and the other one was like admin. Or you could have a shared context where pending confirmation was maybe and admin was true, and you could then define that as a hash here, and it would go off and find the specific shared context, so you could adjust which shared context you're getting based on what you passed to the it block. Is the information in the hash then available in the shared context? Did I miss that part? Pass a hash and store multiple on the metadata. I'm not quite sure if that's then available in there. Like if you pass a hash in here, can you like use it as values within your shared shared context? I guess we could try that. We ran into trouble with this when two different spec files each defined their own shared context with the same let. When these two specs were run in the same process, because of parallelization, one of them would fail apparently without reason. This happened sporadically enough that it actually took almost 2 months for us to realize what was happening. As a result, All Everywhere, which is the people who wrote this blog post, has adopted the convention that we only use metadata to share contexts that are needed in multiple different specs. For example, request mocking for our payment processor or anything else in spec support. Shared context limited in scope to a single spec. We explicitly add the context with include context. Okay, fair enough. Okay, that all makes sense. That's all good. That's like an extra tool in our toolbox for shared contexts. All good. This is shared examples, which is not quite the same thing. Shared context. I think this is just like an intro, which we've just looked at. I get the metadata thing, but I wonder if include context is actually more explicit. And I know we're trying to tidy up, but okay, great. So we're in the same one. Okay, so in the same way that we did with that first blog post, the code with JSON one, let's go and sorry, I did say at the start of this I do have a negative COVID test. So let's do this. Let's implement this. So let's take out the code with JSON version. We'll just comment it for now. And that's the idea of skipping the system test version. One thing I didn't mention here is that there would obviously be potentially be a performance impact of this one. Like, is using the test warden, the warden helpers faster than actually having Capybara perform the steps? You'd have to benchmark that, I guess. I don't know. Right, so again, we've got the same setup here. So let's just arbitrarily do it here. So we've got if we do it within here, do we need our spec dot at the start, or have we already got that as far as from here? Have we we get that inferred? I don't know. We can come back to that. Well, let's actually, can we just do that and see if it like freaks out immediately? Okay, so I'm not sure if that's failed because there's just nothing in the context, or if doesn't like not having RSpec dot at the start. Can we just do, just gonna grab something out from, chuck a let in there and see what it does. Okay, and what happens if we do, this one is including it specifically, but this one's failing on just having it defined. Oh, does something have to be passed in as the second argument? Oh, no, it needs a name. Okay, something. Sorry. We're just trying to make sure the test runs, by the way. Okay, great. So this is irrelevant. That's okay. So this isn't something. This is right. What are we doing it for? We're going to do it for. So we've got as an admin there. So let's just borrow as an admin user. And this is shared context. So what have they got in here? They've got a before block where a bunch of stuff happens. A method that's then available to everything that includes that. Let block. A let that has a hash returned. What does this one do? The other ones. These are just doing let and before. Okay, so let's take all of this, plonk it in here, and let's take all of this and plonk it in here. And then in here, this metadata could be used, but also we could do it explicitly with some syntax that I've literally just been looking at. Here, include context shared stuff. What's that inside? That's inside the describe. Can we do it inside the context? Don't know, let's find out. And I'm assuming it's just using this string as a lookup. Include context as an admin user. So let's see if this now does anything at all. Did we just break that, or does that still make some sense? Okay, so that still works. So we've moved everything up there. So what we could do here is say, as an admin, and this is the symbol that will be inferred as like a true, or like as an admin user. And my understanding of what we can then do from what we've just read is, instead of having to do this include context, we could pass this symbol to this context. I think that's what it was talking about with groups. So does this now pass? That's not. Organization. So that is not bringing it in as it might do. So let's add it to here. I think there's one spec in that. Is it that you can't add it to the context link? It needs Go in there. No. Okay. Did I miss something out of how that's supposed to work? So you pass a symbol to the shared context, which I've done. And then passing the same symbol that it doesn't seem to infer its usage. Okay. I don't mind that because I'm not too fussed about that as a mechanism anyway. So the specific include context worked, but the inferred from metadata didn't. Okay, fine. Okay, so let's take that one step further then. So we've only actually extracted it out for one test, but let's say we now want to have, and they live somewhere in RSpec specific. And then like normally a shared directory or something. Spec shared example. One convention is to put files containing shared examples in spec support and require files that in that directory from spec helper. Historically, this was included in the generated spec helper in RSpec Rails. However, in order to keep your test suite boot time down, it's a good idea not to auto require all files in a directory like this. When running only one spec file, loading unneeded dependencies or performing unneeded setup can have a significant noticeable effect on how long it takes before the first example runs. When all of the groups that include the shared group reside in the same file, just declare the shared group in that file. Okay, so they don't all live in the same file, but we don't want to do an auto require. So are we talking about doing them manually? Like is a require at the top of each file? Is that a better solution? So it would be spec. What did it say? Spec support. I'm going to put that in here because it's like a muscle memory that I have that's where these things live. I'm just going to go look and see if yeah, that is where I've got them on another code base. But spec support features, spec support, shared examples. Okay. Another one then. What have we got in here? Spec support. Okay, this obviously looks like the way that it was done, quote unquote. Controller macros. Okay. I don't think I would have used the word macros. I've obviously grabbed that from somewhere. I'm just looking at another code base here. I've obviously got that of a blog post. Okay, so sport. Let's put in another folder called request. Requests, because the other folder itself is called requests. And is this where like they all go and live, or do we do one per file? Well, let's not put them in a folder because we won't have enough to start with. So let's just let's lift that up a bit. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out what to call things. Let's call this request shared contexts, and then we could do shared examples in another one. No, because it's already in a folder called requests. Fuck it, let's just try that. So in there, so this now won't auto load. Okay, fine. But we have got a shared context we can plonk in there. We can plonk this one in here so as an admin user. Okay, and what we want to do is say we need that file. And what this thing is saying is we used to do this. So now do we need to do this? Or help if we actually spelled require correctly. And then it's get the path. Does this work? It does not work. Okay, cannot load such file. Spec support shared context. RB. I need stuff in here. I probably fucked that up. Oh, do I actually have to call the RB? I don't even know if that's a thing you can do, by the way. I'm just... because that is presumably not being auto-loaded anyway, whereas Rails helper, RSpec helper, RSpec Rails. I think that has that then not been loaded. These are starting as that. Does that make a difference? Because they're not been auto-loaded. Stop bumping into the edge of what the fuck I understand here. Right, okay, yeah. So we have to put that in. Okay, is that a thing that we're doing? Okay. What's happening here? So basically this thing says, hey, the default was that we would just add a line into the spec helper. So in this case, that's here, but then we tend to use Rails helper these days, Railsy stuff. And this could, by default, go and load everything inside spec support. But what this is saying is you probably don't want to do that because you're just going to slow yourself down when you're only running one file. So is what that's saying require individually the helper at the top of each file, or is there a better way to do that? So what I've then done is gone in and added this line. Do I need that? Or is there a way to make, yeah, no, I don't need that. Or is there a way to make the auto loading only happen if like certain, like could you do the auto loading only for system specs? There's stuff inside Rails helper that doesn't that only do stuff for certain types anyway? Like config before each type, like could we say only load them for system tests? Just looking to see if there's any examples of that anyway. Sorry, I'm just looking through. Okay, so this is where this has been removed. So it requires supporting Ruby files with custom matches and macros, etc. in spec support and its subdirectories. Files matching run a spec files by default. Yep, that's all fine. This means that files in spec support that end in _spec will both be required and run as specs, causing the specs to be run twice. It's recommended you do not name files matching this glob to end with _spec. Fine. Configure this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. The following line is provided for convenience purpose. It has the downside of increasing the boot up time by auto requiring all files in the support directory. Alternatively, in the individual spec files, manually require only the support files necessary. Okay, yeah, so that line is saying what we are doing is the performant way of doing it, and you then have to remember to do that. But having something like as an admin, you're going to want that every time we're doing an admin feature test, right? So I'm just going to look and see if I've got something in. So bear with me. Like I've got one where this is being, I hope. So okay, so you get that